I'm Dave Seibert. Welcome to Spotlight, where we highlight leaders and executives in our industry.
Hi, Ro. Thanks for being here.
Happy to be here.
So let's talk about Sixth Street Consulting. Let's start there with what does Sixth Street do?
So Sixth Street Consulting is a professional services organization that does managed services around the Sharepoint offering. So Sharepoint is a great collaboration platform, and a lot of people have it deployed in their organization, but sometimes it's a little bit underutilized, and we help them realize the potential of the platform and help them keep it up and running.
So you mentioned Sharepoint, which is key. Not everybody knows what Sharepoint is. How do you describe Sharepoint if you don't know what it is?
Right. So the way we like to describe SharePoint is it's basically a collaboration platform or an intranet, or a business process engine that they can use for any key business processes for their organization. So SharePoint is something different to everybody. It's kind of like going into Home Depot with a bunch of capabilities. It's a platform more than just a specific service or application, and then it gets into the interviews with the customers when we ask them kind of what's important for them and where their needs are, and we figure out if SharePoint's the right platform to solve those issues.
So let's think of an example. So let's say someone has heard SharePoint, it's benefited another business they know, but they don't know yet how it might benefit their business. What's a good example of how SharePoint benefits a business?
Sure. A common scenario we might run into is someone says, hey, in the previous job that I was at, we really use SharePoint to do all these things. And I noticed that at this company, we still do things the old-fashioned way. And the old-fashioned way might be, and we ask them, well, what do you mean by the old-fashioned way? And they say something along the lines of, well, all of our files are still on a file share. They're not accessible when they're outside of the office, or we're doing it through a VPN. And in my old organization, we had some sort of document management, we had alerting, we had controls, we had metadata, and that's one of the things that we can actually really utilize SharePoint for, is a capability when we start describing that in terms of understanding the way new workers work inside and outside of the office, so geographically independent work in disparate workforces, and you can use a platform like SharePoint to bring all that stuff together. So we start exposing customers to a different way of thinking about their information.
And I know that there's a lot of people that say that they do SharePoint, but for your organization, give an example of, do you do just little projects? Do you do larger projects? What's kind of like the scope range of things that become good projects with businesses for you?
So that's really, that's another great question as well, because that has changed over time. I would say, a few years ago, the projects were a little bit larger because just the investment to get into SharePoint was fairly substantial. When SharePoint was on-premise, it required a couple of servers. They need to be maintained, production level servers, typically anywhere from 3 servers to 5 servers to make up a farm. So by the time you even had the equipment and the software to run the platform, it was a fairly big investment already. So those organizations tended to be a few hundred employees to a few thousand employees to tens of thousands of employees. So that's the range we used to be in terms of a couple of hundred employees to companies up to 100,000 employees with very large multi-year projects. With the advent of SharePoint Online now, a 2-person company can utilize the benefits of SharePoint. And the way we actually interface with those customers now is, since the hardware requirement is taken care of, they can get to just the functional aspects of SharePoint, and we have a team that specifically handles that. So some of our engagements are actually with companies with less than 5 employees now.
That's awesome. I mean, it shows you the power of cloud and how that whole environment has changed, and it's really opened the doors. So I would imagine some businesses that could not have taken on SharePoint now easily can because of that.
Absolutely. And what's incredible is you've got all these enterprise level capabilities basically democratized now. Literally a single person startup can actually start their business with SharePoint, and if they grow to 10 employees, 100 employees, or 10,000 employees, that platform will still be viable for them.
That's awesome. And I don't want to go without touching, when you first started, you mentioned another side of the business, the managed services side. Why don't you take a minute and explain what that is?
Sure.
And what it does?
So managed services side of the business, it's a small portion of our business, but sometimes it's kind of like a precursor or a prerequisite before we can get to kind of our core area, which is SharePoint. And the reason I say that is because if you think about SharePoint, SharePoint is an application that sits on a server, and that server has to be running really well. And it also requires access to like a SQL server, and that server has to be running well, and the network has to be running well. In some instances, we get into situations where, for the companies that need a little bit more on-prem, they need to take care of all the fundamental stuff before they can actually get to the SharePoint piece. And so we have a small part of our business that handles that as well.
That's awesome. And lastly, any closing thoughts? A good example is what territory do you service? Is it regional or is it national? And
yeah, that's a great question as well. I would say we market locally. So we're based in Redondo Beach, California, Southern California. We market locally, but we do work, I would say, regionally in kind of the Western United States, but we've done projects around the world as well. And especially now with things moving to SharePoint Online, we're getting a lot of calls from customers across the country, and it's actually just as easy to do work with them on that platform than it is because we've abstracted away sort of the hardware software requirement, the on-premise requirement.
Right, totally makes sense. Won't we close with what makes for you today an ideal client? Where do you see the engagement that is really something that you would focus on benefiting?
We like customers that like to take care of their stuff and make sure their stuff runs well for their customers. So not only do we like the kind of, I would say, the step up for the project to bring on a new capability, business capability, but to keep that business capability fine-tuned and running. So we like customers that are, from a few employees to several hundred employees or even to several thousand employees that use SharePoint to bring in a new capability, a collaboration platform, but then actually continue to use our services to make sure they have end user support, platform support, and departmental and business capability expansion support as well.
So it's like a strategic part of the business.
That is correct.
It helps you grow the business.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Makes sense. Ro, appreciate the time today.
Thank you for your time as well. Appreciate it.
You got it.